Alright, well, it is time to beat this dead horse, and thankfully, I am not referring to Leonard. I have seen a lot of discourse about Malenia versus Radahn over the years, specifically regarding who is stronger, and while I have seen many creative takes, I have never once seen someone use my reasoning on the subject. And so, I thought it would be nice to share my inputs. Now, obviously, I am not referring to their physical bench press type of strength. The winner would be obvious. Yeah, you mean to say the gravity magic using lion themed beefcake of a demigod who's the size of a fucking elephant can lift more than anyone else? Huh, yeah, imagine that. No, in this instance, we are referring to their combat ability, specifically in their case, their ability to win. Now, this question initially seems kind of redundant, as Malenia does actually win the fight. I don't know if you heard my verbal quotation marks just now, but in case it wasn't obvious, nuking an entire battlefield, including yourself, just so you technically don't lose, isn't usually considered a victory. But I digress. To understand who is stronger, we need to look at their deeds in the game, because clearly there will be no other sources. Now, the first thing to clarify is that we have no way of comparing their strength based solely on the fights that we face in the game. I mean, not only is there technically 3 variants of Radahn, I can explain why there's 3 later, but the game also follows a standard leveling and upgrading formula for video games. Star Scourge Radahn is thus way weaker than he may or may not be compared to Malenia when we fight her. Not even just from the Scarlet Rot either, but his level in-game just had to be reduced to fight him sooner. Also, if we included video game mechanics such as scaling from Shadow Tree fragments, that would still be a massively unfair way to compare them. Because if we did, then Consort Radahn would be way stronger. If we included this type of mechanic, then something like the Demi-Human Swordmaster would be able to keep up with and possibly kill Star Scourge Radahn, which we know, lore-wise, would absolutely never happen. This leaves us with only one option, comparing their deeds of strength and combat scenarios based on lore we can find in the game. For their deeds, I would like to start off with cutscenes that we see, at least the ones relating to Radahn. Specifically, one very famous cutscene as it relates to this debate, the gameplay trailer. I will take a moment to just let it play uninterrupted, and then we can talk about it.
It happened an age ago. But when I recall, I see it true. On a night of wintry fog, the rune of death was stolen. And the demigods began to fall. Starting with Godwyn the Golden. Queen Marika was driven to the brink. The shattering ensued, a war that wrought only darkness. The Elden Ring was broken. But by whom? And why? What could the demigods ever hope to win by warring? conqueror of the stars, General Radahn. And the blade of Mikkel and Malenia the Seventh. These two were the mightiest to remain, and locked horns in combat. But there would be no victor. And so, we inhabit a fractured world, awaiting the arrival of the Elden Lord. Unless, of course, thou shouldst take the crown.
Now, in this trailer, we just saw several things. Tales of war, the Elden Ring's shattering, and an on-screen direct depiction of Malenia facing Radahn. The imagery here shows Malenia standing up from what appears to be a massive injury. She then reattaches her prosthetic arm, while Radahn just stoically stands there and lets her. The image we see shows quite clearly that Radahn is stronger. I mean, it's crystal clear. He is letting her get up because he's strong enough to let her do that, right? Wrong! This is where I want to bring up something very important for determining lore in any video game, not just Elden Ring, and that is the subject of the validity of sources. See, most good games will have cool lore. Even better games will have lore with layers upon layers, a history of lore, if you will. But the best games have layers upon layers of historical lore being told from multiple viewpoints that all may or may not be fully accurate. It gives the viewer a chance to feel fully immersed while trying to solve these mysteries. We see examples of this in Skyrim, where there are multiple different history books written by different people, all relating to the exact same event, but each one of them are told from a different perspective, and thus might be missing or intentionally withholding information. For example, the history books based on the Oblivion Crisis. We were there as players when we play Oblivion. We know exactly what happened from a first-hand account, and yet, for some books, our character in Oblivion isn't even alluded to, because the author in the game of Skyrim doesn't know about them. Now, how does this tie into this video? Well, this trailer cutscene had one major thing to note. It is being directly narrated to us by Ranni, someone who exists in the world and thus someone with limits to their knowledge. Not only that, but someone who brings an objective and a bias to the info they share. We see this as she casually mentions that demigods began to fall, starting with Godwyn the Golden. She says it in such a way as if to suggest she knows nothing else. A sort of, oh, it's such a mystery. Who could have stolen the Rune of Death fragments? I have no possible way of knowing. Her objective here is clear, to cast off suspicion from her recounting of the tale. Because if you've played the game, you know she did it. She knows everything that happened about the Night of Black Knives, because that was her. Notice also how she says Malenia and Radahn are locked in combat, with no victor. She tells us here, directly, that regardless of the imagery on screen, the fight was still a stalemate from the outside perspective. Her validity and possible biases aside, this does seem to make sense, as we know demigods cannot die without either the Rune of Death being unleashed or the Black Knives using a fragment of the rune to kill them. I mean, after all, if you are fighting to the death, how is it possible for either side to win if death is impossible? It isn't. You just don't have a winner. Now, there's one more detail I want to bring up about the video, the imagery of the screen itself. Look closely at the screen as I show it, and just think about what you see. We see Radahn's arena from when we fight him, as in after the battle's conclusion. We know that armies were fighting alongside them. We even have a clean-wrought knight Finlay, who was confirmed to have carried Malenia back to the Haligtree after she blooms. There should have been other warriors there, and yet even look at the red tint of the sky. The decay and destruction of the weapons and everything about the scene is suggesting that it is set post-Scarlet Rot's bloom. This would not be possible to see while the battle was ongoing. The scenery does not line up. There is only one thing this can mean. This scene is not meant to be taken literally. What we see before us is an artist's depiction of Ronnie's telling of the story. Thus, the imagery is only showing things that Ronnie could have seen, and since Ronnie wasn't there, obviously she can't show the full scene to us. And look at Radahn's stance too. It is his signature stance, the one we see him perform at the start of Consort Radahn's battle. It is seemingly his entrance into every one of his fights. Now, it makes no sense to put down your weapons like this in the middle of a fight. If you are fighting someone who is strong, that would be the worst decision you could make. But even if you put that aside, say he's just magically dumber than he actually is, consider this still. If he had just finished attacking Malenia, who, as we know, recovers exceptionally quickly from both her Shard of the Elden Ring, as well as just her innate skills, he wouldn't have even had time to put down his weapons mid-fight. Even more so once you remember that, canonically, there would have been armies fighting around them. This is not an event that actually occurs. This is just a creative depiction showing their most iconic moves, as an outsider would imagine it. Thus, this entire trailer's imagery, even its information, could almost be completely null and void. There is usable info here, such as some of this imagery suggests. Look at her whispering to Radahn. We know that something is whispered, but like I said, an outside account is what's going on, so we have no idea what it actually was if it weren't for lore later on in the game. But with all of the holes and issues that arise from everything that we have seen, it's just not wise to use it as a valid source of evidence. So, I have no choice but to delegate its importance to just being rumors told in game, and not as historical facts. Now, a more valid source, although take valid with a grain of salt, as we don't know the true author of this message. Anyways, a more valid source is the Recollection of War Memorial. It says, "The Battle of Aeonia. Radahn and Malenia locked in stalemate. Then the Scarlet Rot blooms." Now, this source is a little bit more trustworthy due to the fact that there aren't massive gaps in its knowledge, and that's about the only thing that we can ascertain. But this source doubles down on what Ronnie implied, that neither Radahn nor Malenia were able to get a leg up on each other. And so, according to the two available outside sources on the matter, this fight was a true stalemate. And while we are on the subject of sources and whatnot, you know who is a perfectly valid and reliable source? Aside from our character and the item descriptions that our character makes, it's the narrator. The one from the beginning. He is a narrator who has no equivalent character anywhere in Elden Ring, so we can assume he is truly unbiased, and in all of his cutscenes, including the endings, he only states the objective facts that we know and all of the citizens would know for certain. No theories, no misleading ideas, just the straight up down-to-earth knowledge that everyone knows. And he never mentions anything aside from that. But we'll get back to why that is important later. For now, let's start dissecting both of their characters. We should begin, I think, by looking at Malenia's feats of strength.
Heed my words. I am Malenia, Blade of Mikola. And I have never known defeat.
I wanted to start with Malenia because there's one important thing to start with, or I guess one important person, Millicent. Now, Millicent goes on record to say that Malenia abandoned her pride to meet Radahn's measure, implying her use of the Scarlet Bloom. This immediately puts Malenia in a bad position, especially since I personally believe Millicent to be a second half of Malenia, as I described in a previous video. Now, if we are to take her at her word, then it is clear that Radahn is stronger. However, given the time we spent talking to Millicent, I don't truly believe this to be fully accurate. Granted, I do not believe Malenia would have won without blooming, however, I don't think Radahn could have won either. Millicent is very self-critical in the time we know her, and if she and Malenia are the same person, then Malenia would share in that criticism, especially if she regards Malenia as having discarded her honor. It seems, if nothing else, that she's being hypercritical of Malenia's performance due to how victory was obtained. Aside from that, Malenia's feats in the game seem to go as follows, as said by both herself, numerous times if you died to her as much as I did, and various sources throughout the game. She is a combat prodigy, specifically to the point that she has never known defeat. The exact conditions of failure in this case are unknown, but we should assume that losing in her mind does not mean dying. That would be a pointless, ridiculous claim in a land where people are immortal, because in that case, everyone in the lands between has never known defeat. Now, there is some lore about her assaulting Stormvale and Godric begging for his life to prevent her from killing him, but that's Godric we're talking about, and that's not exactly a point of bragging for a demigod, or even a regular person, but I suppose some credit is deserved for demolishing Stormvale with her forces to the point that when we get there years later, the castle still has not recovered, hardly at all. She also resists the Scarlet Rot for a decent amount of her life unaided, and once she acquires the unalloyed Golden Needle as well as the Great Rune, her strength only enhances further as she can focus on things other than willing the rot to stay dormant. We also know that her unique combat skills and prowess led to an order of Valkyries who use her unique waterfall dance, an order that exists solely due to how amazing this weapon art is. Aside from that, we don't know much else. She is extremely difficult when we fight her in the game, but like I said, that doesn't actually amount to anything. So with that, we should move on to Radahn. I do want to note one thing real quick, that her life is in dedicated service to Miquella, which will be important information later, but it's just not a feat of strength.
Now, the vow will be honored, and my lord brother's soul will return, so that he may be my consort.
Now, Radahn has a bit more substance for us to grab onto when it comes to his feats of strength. For one thing, we know that he is incredibly strong in the physical sense, becoming a decorated swordsman of two noticeably large weapons well before his magic is obtained. I mentioned earlier that Radahn has 3 versions of his fights. We know Starscourge Radahn, and we know Consort Radahn, and proving this next one would be a video topic all on its own, but I believe the Putrescent Knight is also Radahn. It is his corpse that we fight underground, and it is putrid due to the effects of the rot once he is no longer immortal. So one of his feats does involve officially dying well before Malenia, actually dying twice in combat before Malenia, which doesn't help his case much. Now, in his life, he also learns gravity magic, and seems to perfect it, which leads us to our next point, when he, quote, wages a war on the stars and their swirling constellations. And then he wins. This is a crazy subject that I think we need to look into a lot more in depth. Simply put, we need to figure out what this actually means before we can categorize how strong this makes him. For one thing, the phrase waging a war is kind of cryptic. It's not terminology you would usually use to discuss inanimate objects, even if those objects involved the fate of your sister. If it was just inanimate objects, then halting the stars or holding them in place would be just as viable terminology. But they specifically say he waged a war on them. I will expand on this after I clarify one more thing. We know for certain he does not actually hold back or stop a single star. What he does hold back is meteorites, as in a star shower. If it was a matter of forcing stars millions of light years away to cease moving, then we would have an absolute winner for the entire lore of all FromSoft games, not just Elden Ring. But this is not the case. It's simply too large of a scale to perform on, and especially since one of the literal gods, not a demigod, who could crush Radahn fairly easily, it would seem, arrived on a meteorite. And seemingly, this god would be unable to perform a feat of that scale themselves. It seems to me like what he did goes as follows. Knowing the stars held Ranni's fate, he challenged the Astel, or Astels, plural, behind the prominent meteor shower that would impact her fate the most. After besting them in battle, he successfully forces them to stay out of the lands between, up until he dies. Now, I am unsure if this was an active spell being cast permanently, but my opinion hinges on the fact that it isn't. For one thing, the amount of time spent maintaining a spell without losing focus amid multiple wars that lasted years just doesn't sit right with me. Especially after he's afflicted with scarlet rot and becomes mindless like a dog. The star shower still doesn't begin. It would seem to me that after his battle with the Astel, or Astels plural, they refused to enter the lands between until Radahn wasn't there to impede them. If this is the case, then this means that while certainly he is extremely impressive, it is not some godly feat that is impossible to have halted the stars in this way. This would also line up as to why we fight so many Astels along the path to Ranni, and then face one named Astel immediately before meeting with her. These Astels and possibly falling star beasts were the stars that would be moving. They were the meteor shower. It was just a movement of gravity-based creatures who were on their way to enter the lands between. Now, whether they were invading or just arriving by chance, or even maybe trying to free the Astel locked underground, who can say? I have not read enough about their motives to even try to answer that at this time, and so I won't try to. But with that in mind, there is one more feat of Radahn's that is given. It's a sort of callback to earlier. Remember how I said the narrator was a trustable source? Well, the imagery he provides would seemingly be trustworthy as well. People familiar with this might know what I'm referring to already, but in the opening cutscene there is a very notable picture. I will show the cutscene here as it pertains to our topic, and then we will discuss it.
The fallen leaves tell a story. The great Elden Ring was shattered. In our home, across the fog, the lands between. Now, Queen Marika the Eternal is nowhere to be found. And in the night of the Black Knives, Godwyn the Golden was first to perish. Soon, Marika's offspring, demigods all, claimed the shards of the Elden Ring. The mad taint of their newfound strength triggered the shattering. A war from which no lord arose. A war leading to abandonment by the greater will.
Rolling it back a little bit, do you see it? Right here? This image consists of Morgoth pinning down Radahn in a fight, seeming to declare Morgoth as the victor. I have seen many people who, when addressing this as a source, either say that this just doesn't count or that Morgoth is actually the strongest demigod. I see something completely different. It's actually the one detail that fuels my entire perspective in this debate. Look closer at the picture, and you see this. Soldiers of Leyndell. Notice also, in this picture, the color red from Radahn's hair is accentuated to stand out, and all the gold colors are muted. Now, assumingly, this would be due to the fog of war in the air, but I also believe it is a symbolic design choice. It shows the tarnishing of gold that would have originally been so vibrant in the lands between. The gold has dulled to the point that any other color simply pops out in comparison. We can safely assume that if there were any other vibrant reds or blues, they would stand out, but we don't see any. This is how we know that these are all Leyndell soldiers, and more importantly, that there aren't any Redmane soldiers. What we are witnessing here is not a failed one-on-one fight, it is a failed military effort on Radahn's part. We know that it's Radahn's failure as well, because Morgoth has not been leading armies to conquer lands. He's been trying to defend the Erdtree and see a rightful ruler take the throne. While he definitely wishes that ruler were him, he still respects the tree's wishes and guards it. He does not leave Leyndell, in summary. So the only way that this could occur is if Radahn was the one assaulting. And if Radahn failed an assault on Leyndell, and we see the aftermath of his defeat, then we have an answer. From there, we can speculate that he either escaped or Morgoth let him go after proving military superiority. Right here, I believe, we get the most vital piece of information, or the best clue about the whole Malenia and Radahn debate. Even though Radahn would most definitely have been stronger than Morgoth, his military disadvantage in regards to Leyndell's defenses and walls, as well as its armies, led to Radahn's defeat. It's also worth noting this image from the cutscene. Now, I didn't remember this image when I was thinking about this and writing the script, but I think it helps my argument further if you think about it. Notice its similarities and its differences to Ranni's version. They are still fighting, Malenia's arm has been wounded, but look at Radahn. He is definitely not acting calm and stoic in the scene. He much more resembles the look of someone fighting to the death. What this implies in regards to their strength, it's hard to say, as Malenia does look injured and small compared to him, but like I said, we also know that she regenerates nearly instantly from attacking others, which she could very quickly do immediately after this image. And as for seeming small, well, I already compared Radahn to an elephant, so literally every human in existence would seem small compared to him, but it does lend credence to his strength, so I figured it was still worth noting. For my last bit, I will call in another point of interest in the matter, the War-Dead Catacombs. In the catacombs, we see ghosts of the Redmane and Haligtree armies still fighting. At the end of the dungeon, after the Putrid Tree Spirit, we can see that there is not a Godwyn clone or extension, so here we see something special. These apparitions aren't undead per se, rather they're just living on. Seemingly like how a ghost would be, but I'm just pointing out how the death root isn't there, and so it's a separate thing occurring. They continue their fight eternally since they literally cannot die. Even after losing so much of their body that they no longer have a physical form, their spirits are still unable to move on, and so they continue, still stricken with the loss of cognitive function that came from the Scarlet Rot. I assume this because after years of endless combat, they still seem unable to think, hey, we've been fighting for years, maybe we should just give it a rest since no one has ever permanently won in that time. I see this place as very important to understanding how the battle went down between Radahn and Malenia, because this is what I was referring to when I said that no one else had brought up my opinion before. Malenia versus Radahn was not a 1v1 fight in the way that we get the chance to face them. It was an all-out war, with tactics, terrain advantages, ballistas, possibly other war machines. These are important things to note. Also important to note, Radahn had a military advantage in this scenario. He had the Caelid Wilds slowing down invaders, and a very defendable fort to house his armies, and since he was on the defense, he could use it. We know this because Malenia had to have been the one on the assault. Miquella sent her to retrieve Radahn as his consort, which appears to be the entire reason behind why this battle would occur in the first place. With all this in mind, I think I've painted a very clear picture of evidence, and so I would like to finalize my findings by telling the tale of how their battle began, and how it ended. At the start, Miquella sends Malenia on her most important quest yet. As he departs to the Shadowlands, she is to acquire his consort. So she rallies the troops and begins to march. And so we see a horrific, bloody battle ensue. The sheer tenacity of Malenia's forces overwhelm Radahn at first. Their sheer willingness to die for their cause makes up for their tactical inferiority, and Radahn is pushed out of his fort and forced into a close-up confrontation. But this is where the tides begin to turn. Malenia's forces are certainly tenacious and unbelievably willing to die for their cause. In fact, they seem too willing to die. Seriously, guys, the forces brainwashed by Miquella all carry suicide flasks just in case. That way, if they start to lose, they can just blow themselves up and hopefully take out the other person with them. I know this kind of breaks the tone of the storytelling, but it's such a subtle fact that has such horrible lore implications after the DLC's release. I mean, knowing what we know, it's seriously fucked up. But continuing the story, the self-destructive tactics of Miquella's troops aren't viable in a real war. It's too costly to their manpower. And yeah, they can't actually die if they have the Erdtree's blessing, but they can't continue fighting after being reduced to ground beef either. So we see Radahn's forces ever so slowly begin to take the advantage. Meanwhile, the entire time the battle has been ongoing, Malenia and Radahn have been locked in a stalemate, with neither of them gaining ground. Radahn hits one heavy attack, Malenia retaliates threefold with smaller attacks that heal her. It evens out, and essentially they deal the same amount of damage to each other, which is very little. And in this way, neither of them gain any ground. They are perfectly matched in almost every way. They both even have a last-ditch suicide bomb type of move if they truly need to win. Radahn has his meteorite attack, however his pride refuses to let him use it while his troops could be in the way. It is his last-ditch effort should his armies somehow fail. In contrast, Malenia has her Scarlet Bloom. While she isn't afraid of harming her troops, the damage to herself is more than enough reason to avoid using it. Besides, she needs Radahn alive to be Miquella's consort, or at least she needs to buy Miquella more time to have other methods available for his consortship should his death be needed. And in this manner, days pass, weeks, months perhaps, possibly even years, and as the tides slowly turn in the armies, we begin to reach our conclusion. Radahn and Malenia are a perfect match in almost every way. Almost. Their one difference is their armies. The casualties sustained to Malenia's army begins to be too much to ignore. She could continue fighting Radahn in a stalemate forever, but she doesn't have forever. His armies are going to fully overtake hers soon, so she grits her teeth and prepares herself for her last possible hope of victory. She rushes forward and latches onto Radahn to ensure he can't jump away like he would of his meteorite attack. She whispers in his ear, "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort." And then she breaks the needle. Immediately the scarlet rot blooms, erupting a putrid, rotting nuke onto the battlefield, an act that leaves her incapacitated and destroys Radahn's chances of ever winning. But the losses are immense. Even as Cleanrot Knight Finlay carries Malenia off the field of battle, the fully eviscerated bodies of the troops still try to fight. Too damaged to understand what is happening, they continue to lock themselves in perpetual warfare until eventually someone can release the Rune of Death and save them from their misery. And Radahn is left to wander the field of battle, picking at scraps until his mind decays. Yet, eventually, he is defeated yet again, and he is brought to the Shadow Realm where he can officially die and be reincarnated using the body of Moog. This brings me to my answer. Who is stronger? Neither. They are perfectly evenly matched because they are meant to be that way. Their characters are meant to be foils to each other, highlighting the differences that can exist between two warriors that would otherwise be so similar. On one hand, a character who has never once failed and makes that the source of her pride. On the other, a character who has seen many failures and has chosen to learn from them. It's an exact comparison played between the ideas of winning through sheer might and will, and winning through sheer talent and skill. And these character arcs as foils only truly make sense if they are of exactly the same strength and battle aptitude. They were perfectly equal, but their armies and mindsets were not. And in the end, these were the deciding factors. And with that, that is my input on the matter. Let me know what you guys think. This is one of the subjects in Elden Ring where I truly believe that I know as much as anyone could possibly know, but if I did somehow miss something, I would be happy to find out. I'm always happy to read more about the lore of Elden Ring. And also, I'm going to link my Twitch in this video. I forgot to do it in the last one. I don't know when or if I would have the time to stream, but assuming that I do, I think I've decided on doing an Elden Ring playthrough. It has been a while since I've played, and I just think it would be fun. And besides, I have a special way of challenging myself in the game that I would be interested in showing people. Now, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you again in any future videos.